Good evening to all who are present here and all who are joining us through Zoom or Team, or the mechanism that we're using from all around the world. And I think, Niraja, it's probably good night for you because it might be past midnight where you are. So welcome to everyone. It's a particular pleasure to bring you together to what is, in some sense, a conclusion of this Academic Freedom series. And I will hand you to the person who's been the architect of this, but with a few quick observations. It was probably about 2 years ago that Liviu and I met in our office to discuss what at that time seemed a rather abstract issue. And the abstract issue was there was a bill making its way through the British Parliament. It had something to do with academic freedom. And we wondered whether all of this stuff was even worth the bother. And I think 2 years hence, events have told us how critical this issue of academic freedom is for universities and is for society. And Liviu, while you are a scholar of this, I have in those 2 years had the pleasure of being a vice chancellor. So if I may, I'll make 2 or 3 quick comments about what this has meant from the vice chancellor's chair. So the first thing is, when all of this started 2 years ago, most of the letters that I would receive would be from a minister or someone saying, oh, your universities are too woke, you don't allow speakers, diversity coming here. And we must have freedom of speech and we'll ensure it through law. Interestingly enough, I now get the letters from pretty much the same people who are saying, how dare your professor say these things about this or that. But in some sense, that is good, because what it has done is rounded off the conversation that everyone needs academic freedom on universities. It is not for the left or for the right. And therefore, it is very important that the universities get their interpretation of academic freedom right. The second thing, in the very recent times that has come to me, is that implementing this thing called academic freedom in a university is all a matter of context. Now, usually whenever anyone says, oh, it's all a matter of context, that is seen as a watering down statement of relativism, that you don't really want to take a position on anything. You're essentially leaving for yourself the room open to do whatever you want to do. But it is rather complicated, I have to say. And I'll give you a simple live example. As you can imagine, the speech around the Israel-Gaza issue on university campuses is an issue all over the world. We, like other universities, have received a lot of emails and complaints from students and others, often about the use of a particular phrase. And from river to sea, Palestine will be free. What is this? What does this mean? Should this be allowed to be chanted in a university? Should this be allowed to be discussed at a university? And we've actually sought legal opinion on this, and it turns out to be rather complicated. So if you wish to get together in a classroom and have a debate about the meaning of this, the implication of it, does it really leave any room for Israel or not, that is very well within the norms of an academic discussion. If you wish to hold a placard saying this in large numbers on the university premises as a show of an opinion, that is perhaps also permissible. If you wave this with flags in a university entrance in a way that picket lines are often organized, such that people have to go through them, might actually start becoming intimidating. Now, the same piece of speech, the same university, subtle matters of who is saying what, in what way, in what building of the university, currently within British law, could put it along the spectrum of perfectly fine academic freedom to perhaps contestable and something the university has to do. So I think we as universities will need to get much sharper about this if we are to do justice to academic freedom. But the third thing that has come home to me is, what is the opinion of the university on these matters? So fine, academic freedom for all the academics, but what about the university, the corporation? Is it to have a say? what can it say? Does the university as an entity have the academic freedom to say whatever it wishes to? And if so, who decides what the university says? And I can tell you this is far from trivial, because any message that I now send out invariably gets emails of complaint about how either one has not done justice to the cause that one is trying to support when one is trying to support no cause, or how can you send out this when you did not send out a similar message when an event like this happened a week ago? This is not just King's. I can assure you every single university president in the Western world at the moment is dealing with it. So I think, Liviu, the matters that you brought to my office 2 years ago, the discussions that this panel and all the members have had over the last, I think, 4 of our meetings, is that correct, are more relevant and more alive here today. And I'm really delighted that you're bringing all of this to close with some principles that you would share with us. But having had sight of your principles, I will leave you with this one challenge. It will not be enough that those within the walls of universities, even universities all over the world, reach a consensus on this matter. We will have to take our version of academic freedom out to society and sell it to society, that it is the special space they should create for us because it is in their interest. And that's the part that'll be hard. I can see that sensible academics in most universities, because we are rather alike, can reach such a consensus, convincing our societies, and invariably that will mean the government of the day in a given society, will be the really hard task. Because without that, we will always be at the mercy of ministerial letters. So can I, with that, leave it back in your hands, Liviu? Thank you very much for the job that you've done and the fellow academics. Can I thank all the people who are joining us from far and wide morning to night? And I look forward to the principles you're going to pronounce today and the work that will continue. And I thank all the people who are assembled here with us today. So over to you. Thank you, Liviu.
Well, thank you very much, Kshitij, really. And I also want to thank all of you for coming here or for joining us online. My task tonight is indeed very briefly to introduce these draft principles for reimagining academic freedom, but I would like to thank our Vice Chancellor and President for the chance to do this work on academic freedom here at King's since December last year. And I think it speaks a lot that the first ever presidential series at King's was on the topic of academic freedom. So for me, it has been a remarkable personal experience, but I also trust that it was one that was of a broader relevance as well. The principles that I will be presenting in a moment, principles for reimagining academic freedom, are the product of this series. And I wanted to say that we have received significant feedback on the draft already, and we are also looking forward to a final round of discussions today. There will be further edits after this discussion, and then hopefully this document will take some kind of a final form. The principles are, the text with the principles is not too long. You may have the brochure, but however, I will not read it out so that to leave enough time for discussions. But before I get to the principles, and I will present a short summary of them, let me also try to put them a little bit in the context of the presidential series. And if everything is right, not quite yet. Okay, we can, yeah. So very briefly about the motivations, the process and participation, outputs and impact to date, if I may use these terms, and also challenges and some further work. So in terms of motivations, we started this series with the assumption that the current times are special in the history of academic freedom. So not business as usual. We didn't know everything that was about to come, but we wanted to test this assumption. Is this a special time for academic freedom? By asking the question, is there a need to reimagine academic freedom, to chart a new course for it? And if yes, how does one do it? How do we reimagine academic freedom? What do we have to pay attention to? In terms of process and participation, we imagine the series as an inclusive platform, bringing together all types of stakeholders and from all regions of the world. And I believe this has happened. Participants in various formats have been researchers of academic freedom, university staff from various disciplinary horizons, students, university leaders, public authorities, media professionals, international organizations, trade union representatives from all continents. Outside the sessions, the 4 sessions of the series, we have received extensive feedback, including to the very text with the draft principles. And just to say a little about this, more than 100 people have written in the last 2-3 weeks from about 30 countries in an individual capacity most of the time, but also sometimes representing national or international organizations. So we are very grateful for the interest, and also we feel encouraged that others might find this initiative to be of some use. So in terms of outcomes and impact to date, we had very good discussions, excellent discussions of a few important issues that don't quite take place elsewhere, or at least some of them. And again, the principles are the most tangible result of this series. But there were some other results. Together with Kshitij, we published an op-ed on academic freedom, which has attracted quite some attention here in the UK and beyond. We published, co-edited a special issue also on reimagining academic freedom in the Journal of Philosophy and Theory of Higher Education. A collective volume is due to come out next year on the possibility and desirability of a common global reference for academic freedom. That is a follow-up on one of the sessions. A research project was funded by King's Partnership Fund. There are articles also being prepared, coming out soon, written with colleagues from China Law Institute or with colleagues from other universities in the UK. I think one important outcome of this series was that we put on the public agenda, or contributed to putting on the public agenda, ideas such as reimagining academic freedom is happening. We don't need to reduce academic freedom to freedom of speech. There is a need for the universities to be involved in reimagining academic freedom. Now, also very briefly, talking about challenges and further work, and Kshitij mentioned an important one, which we haven't addressed, about the communication with the general public on this matter. These principles are intended as a signal, an effort to share with others an understanding regarding what is happening in higher education, in the area of academic freedom, including positive developments, because there are some positive developments recently with regard to charting a new course for academic freedom. These principles are also a proposal and a collegial appeal to universities to engage in reimagining academic freedom, and we also take the freedom of proposing a few possible anchors or references, conceptual and actional. What can one pay attention to conceptually or think about when really engaging in such efforts? So we intend to continue the research on academic freedom at King's, focusing, as we have done as part of this series, on matters of conceptualization, codification, and also practice of academic freedom, maybe in the framework of the Global Observatory of Academic Freedom. And Danielle, who will be chairing this evening, is the chair of the advisory board, and we have already topics and ideas for a few larger collaborative research projects. And I would like just to end speaking about the future. We also plan to go beyond research and engage in reimagining academic freedom, as we say in one of these principles, and trying to help coordinating or create a platform for consultation among those who are working on reimagining academic freedom. So we have the funding to organize a pretty large conference next year in May, where we hope to bring together everybody who is engaged in this, international organizations, UNESCO, the European Union, national governments, international organizations, just to be at the same table and discuss what one is doing, what the other is doing. So I will now really get to the principles, but I wanted to say I have tried to be very loyal to the series in drafting them, and of course there are many other important issues, but if they haven't been discussed as part of the series, they are not reflected in this list. So, if you think there is something important that is missing or that is wrong, we'll be very grateful for your comments on that. So 11 principles for reimagining academic freedom. It just happened, it's not 10, not 12. It just happened really, and as I promised, I'll go very quickly through them. There are more explanations in the text. Reimagining academic freedom is necessary given what is happening in our societies and also in higher education. Many of the older conceptual references, regulatory references, simply don't work. So that's what we mean by reimagining academic freedom, and new conceptualizations and new codifications. Universities can and must participate actively in reimagining academic freedom, maybe even take the lead in this process. And it's very interesting, many of those who commented on the draft said this is not quite clear. What does it mean that so far universities haven't been active in reimagining academic freedom? Because individual academics have been active, and I think we do need to clarify that a little further. Although I do stand by the statement and the explanations here. 3, it is important to consider the composite conceptual nature of academic freedom, for it is at the same time a human right, a fundamental right, a value, and a governance principle. There are many difficulties for those who think right about academic freedom, who work to defend it. If we think of academic freedom only as a human right, it's clearly the case that there are infringements in Afghanistan, to take a recent example. But is it that clear that there are infringements of academic freedom as a human right in the UK, for example, or in Germany? It is a lot more difficult, and using a different facets of this concept, which is fundamental right, a value, or a governance principle. So we advocate for considering all facets of the concept. Reimagining academic freedom must explicitly and programmatically consider other related concepts, principles, and values. It happens very often that academic freedom is confused with other concepts or reduced to other concepts. Currently, there is a global trend to misconstrue academic freedom as freedom of expression, or freedom of speech alone. But what is also important is to acknowledge that there are other concepts, what could be considered a cluster of knowledge-related concepts, such as academic integrity, university autonomy, public responsibility for and of higher education, participation of university staff and students in governance. So reimagining of academic freedom must consider these other concepts as well, while at the same time, and I suggested to have this as a separate principle, academic freedom is a distinct concept, cannot be reduced to other concepts. It is very often the case, for example, that academic freedom and university autonomy are considered one and the same, and they are not. So there is a cluster of concepts. They must be taken into account together, but academic freedom cannot be reduced to other concepts in this cluster. 6, it is important for universities themselves to adopt internal guidelines and regulations with regard to academic freedom. Don't leave it all to public authorities, to international organizations. And again, I'm not going to repeat the arguments that are in the text in favor of this principle. It is important when academic freedom is reconceptualized, codified anew, to acknowledge the principle that students belong to the scope of academic freedom in all its dimensions, education, research, and governance. It is important not to over-legalize the reimagining of academic freedom. So it is not principled here. The way it is proposed doesn't say that legislation is not necessary or useful, but don't over-legalize. And we are seeing currently efforts to genuine attempts of safeguarding academic freedom, which result in over-legalizing. Just to give an example, the European Parliament or a committee of the European Parliament has this idea that in order to protect academic freedom in Europe, the very treaty of the European Union must be amended and include provisions about the protection of academic freedom. Of course, this will not work practically. Member states will not adopt it. Then the Parliament decided to, or thought to adopt Parliament legislation, European directives. That didn't work either. So where are we going? If the only solution is the law, we may run into problems. And this is just one line of argument in favor of not over-legalizing. And it goes also hand in hand with the other principle: universities must have their own regulation, guidelines, policies. 9, universities can act as conveners of consultation and coordination platform among various initiatives aiming at reimagining academic freedom. So there is a lot that is happening after 2015 by way of reimagining academic freedom. One new definition emerging here, one other definition emerging there, monitoring mechanism here, monitoring mechanism there, guidelines for implementation in one part. So, before 2015, there was very little attention to reconceptualizing, codifying academic freedom. Now, in a way, we have too much, and there's no coordination among these initiatives. And we are suggesting that maybe universities can take the initiative, and this would also be a way for them of engaging with these very important actors, usually public authorities and international organizations. I'm getting to the end of it. Given the international cooperation and internationalization are intrinsic dimensions of contemporary education, it is important to consider them when reimagining academic freedom. So national principles are not sufficient, and in this context, it is very important to pay attention to issues of decolonizing academic freedom and higher education in general. There's not much research about that. There is no authoritative research to say what is decolonization of academic freedom even about. What are people who talk about it, whether in favor or against talking about when they do that? So we are proposing to do some research in that area. And finally, while many of the existing conceptual references and formal codifications of academic freedom are outdated, incomplete, largely forgotten, or not really usable, they must not be just discarded like that. There is a need, if we replace them, to replace them in a systematic, intelligent way. We may say, the UNESCO recommendation regarding the status of university personnel of 1997 doesn't work, which is true. But if we just say, although many governments have ratified it, well, it should be dropped, there's nothing to replace it. So that as long as we have that reference, it is better than having none. So I will really end by asking the question, what is at stake? What are we talking about it? Reimagining academic freedom. What are we talking about academic freedom? And I will go back to two really classical perspectives on academic freedom. This is important because academic freedom is a precondition for the university to pursue its core mission, which is production, transmission, dissemination, and use of knowledge as a public good. But also academic freedom is a necessary condition for the effective and democratic functioning of the universities and for the broader society as well. So I will end here and hand it over to Danielle, with many thanks to all of you and also to the distinguished members of the panel for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Liviu. I'll proceed by introducing the members of the panel in very, very short manner so that we have much time for the discussion. So in the first instance, I'll introduce Niraja Jayal, who is the Advanced Chair at India Institute, King's College, and Centennial Professor at London School of Economics in the Department of Gender Studies. She was formerly professor at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Welcome. Another member of the panel is Jacques Frémont, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Ottawa, Canada. He served as the chair of Quebec's Human Rights and Youth Rights Commission and director of the International Higher Education Support Program. Constitutional and public law scholar, he coordinated also major international cooperation projects in the fields of human rights and judicial training. And our third member of the panel is Martina Darmanin, former president of the European Students' Union. Welcome, all of you. We look forward to listening
Klaus.
to you. Klaus.
Yes, I'm sorry. So we have a fourth participant. The list that you are given is not updated. I apologize for that. So we have Klaus Beiter, who is a professor of law at Northwest University in South Africa. He is currently in Berlin with a scholarship, and Klaus has done a lot of research on academic freedom in Europe and in other parts of the world. So apologies for that.
Yeah, I apologize.
Danielle.
My list didn't include you. I'm sorry, Klaus, even though I met you in a previous meeting. So, shall I call Niraja Gopal Jayal to speak first, please?
Thank you very much. It's 1 a.m. my time, so forgive me if I'm less than coherent. I believe that this initiative to reimagine academic freedom could not be more timely. The need for it seems to me to be indisputable. Equally indisputable is the idea that the academic community should be at the center of, indeed, driving the process by which we arrive at principles that can be helpful in the present. What is astonishing to me is that these propositions, which are self-evidently valuable to so many of us, should need justification, but then these are the times in which we live. On the need first to reimagine academic freedom, discussions of this subject typically go back to the first articulation of such principles in the 1915 declaration of the AAUP. These are without doubt excellent principles, but they're obviously inadequate to meet the challenges of the present. Several of these challenges have been flagged in the first principle of the document we're discussing, and I'd like to amplify one of them that resonates particularly strongly in my part of the world. This is the parallel, now well established in scholarship, between democratic decline and the erosion of academic freedom. It leads us to a sobering conclusion that reimagine academic freedom as we might, unless and until democracy is strengthened, academic freedom has only a slim chance of recovering and surviving. Second, it is inconceivable that any legitimate exercise to evolve principles of academic freedom could even begin to be undertaken without the active involvement of the academic community, teachers and students, who are the core stakeholders here. The draft principles rightly differentiate between academic freedom and freedom of speech, and that distinction speaks to exactly what is at stake here. In matters of freedom of speech, the entire citizenry of a democracy has a stake. In matters of academic freedom, it is primarily teachers and students that are affected in the first instance. Thus far, the question of academic freedom has tended to exclude students except as passive recipients of the knowledge that is produced under, we presume, conditions of academic freedom. Principle 7 of the document is a valuable corrective, because if we recognize students, and especially student researchers, as rightful participants in the creation of knowledge, we would need to recognize that the denial of academic freedom is effectively a form of censorship that has no place in the academy. While the question of a common global conceptual reference for academic freedom needs more debate, I'd like to offer a couple of reflections on some of these draft principles from a specifically Indian perspective. Principle 3 describes academic freedom as simultaneously a human right, a fundamental right, a value, and a governance principle. While Principle 8 wisely cautions against over-legalizing this right, it's good to remember that just a few months ago, a UN working group formulated a set of principles for implementing academic freedom as both a right and a duty, and it did so in light of recent challenges to academic freedom across the world. Now, from an Indian perspective, the assertion of academic freedom as a right is likely to be less efficacious than recognizing academic freedom as a principle of university governance. Public universities have historically had very weak institutional autonomy, with centralization, bureaucratization, and politicization being long-standing features of higher education in India. These have been and remain structural constraints on the autonomy of universities that compromise academic freedom in subtle and often unrecognized ways. The public university is and has always been a department of state. Everything from faculty recruitment, pay grades, tenure, mechanism for promotion are governed by the same principles as those applied to civil servants. Even control over what we consider to be purely academic matters, the duration of a degree, the nomenclature of a degree, the content of syllabi, control over these has vested in the educational bureaucracy rather than in university faculty. Now, because these structural features of Indian universities did not obtain in universities in the global north, the standard definitions of academic freedom emanating from the global north have never taken account of these constraints. This obviously has implications for the point about a common global conceptual reference. In recent times, the constraints on academic freedom in India have multiplied. The freedom to teach, research, write, publish are all beleaguered. It is possible that some of these may be recovered if democratic decline is arrested, if democracy is strengthened. Even so, the freedom to write, research, publish, teach, etc. are necessary but not sufficient conditions of academic freedom. So long as the structural features of university autonomy remain unreformed, substantive academic freedom will remain elusive. As such, reimagining academic freedom entails giving due consideration to the question of university autonomy, even if they are, as Liviu said a short while ago, conceptually distinct. This reinforces the point that the roles and purposes envisaged for universities in Principles 2, 6, and 9 may in many contexts require enabling conditions which arguably lie outside universities in the larger social and political ecosystem. And it's therefore worth asking the question, what are the conditions under which universities can take such initiatives in adopting internal guidelines on academic freedom or convening meaningful consultations and coordination? A small start could be for universities to persuade the mainstream ranking agencies to incorporate academic freedom as an indicator. As of now, academic freedom rankings are undertaken separately from university rankings in general and do not enjoy the kind of popular purchase that the mainstream rankings do. The claim that academic freedom is a critical condition for a university to thrive is easily sustained by considering how many excellent universities we see in non-democratic or quasi-democratic countries. Very few. Including academic freedom as an indicator would make the rankings more credible, more robust, and also bring to prominence the question of whether university excellence can at all be achieved without academic freedom. And finally, and in parallel, I believe, and this is a point that our President and Vice Chancellor Kshitij Kapoor just made, I too believe that there is need for democratic citizens across the world to be made conscious of the social value of academic freedom. The university is the site of a creative tension between, on the one hand, the quest for certitude in knowledge, and on the other, the premise of uncertainty that must necessarily characterize the impulse to interrogate those certitudes, to challenge them, to modify their truth claims, sometimes even displace them with newer truths. All these, of course, following accepted protocols of knowledge creation and conforming to the accepted standards of what constitutes knowledge. So claims to academic freedom must emphasize the social value of objective scientific knowledge and also emphasize how indispensable academic freedom is to the realization of this social value. Thank you very much, Daniele.
Thank you very much, Niraja. That was clearly and pertinently put to give us food for thought and discussion. I shall turn to Jacques Frémont. Jacques, if you want to take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I speak from Doha in Qatar, where there was the International Association of Universities conference in the last 2 days. And I can tell you that the vision about academic freedom and the whether universities have opinions or not was widely discussed, and there seems to be a wide gap between the global north and the global south. So the table is set for some very, very interesting conversation. There's obviously clearly a need to reimagine academic freedom, a necessity, and I think that the actual events around the world testify to that. As a president of a university in the north, I can vouch to what the president just said, the vice chancellor just said. We are living on a daily basis issues of academic freedom and freedom of expression. And the emerging geopolitical order in the last 10 years, I mean, universities are becoming, whether they want it or not, geopolitical actors, and that threatens clearly academic freedom. I will share a few reflections about the principles, but seen from a very practical point of view. At my university, we had a huge crisis, that is 3 or 4 years ago, around the issue of academic freedom and freedom of expression, along the lines of some racist incident which happened on campus. And there are a few lessons to be learned from the process we followed to solve that crisis, but also to define what is, for the University of Ottawa, what is academic freedom and what is freedom of expression for our university. First, I mean, very clearly, as one of the principles says, do not over-legalize things. We need flexibility. There has to be, the more defined the notion is, the more difficult it is to catch the spirit of the notion. And very clearly, we didn't use, we used statements and we used policies and certainly not regulations to define academic freedom. There's also a clear confusion between academic freedom and freedom of expression that is crystal clear, but the one concept embraces the other. So academic freedom is much, much larger, but issues very often crystallize around freedom of speech. The part of the debate at the University of Ottawa has been to the concept of freedom of speech, academic freedom was not large enough to include other values which ought to be included. For instance, the values of equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, so on and so forth. So it was felt after an extensive discussion by the community that we could not stick to a strict approach. And of course, being in Canada, the strict approach is that of the First Amendment of the US Constitution, which really pollutes the understanding we have of proper academic freedom and freedom of expression on our campuses in Canada. The US legal approach is radical. We do not have to be that radical. So that conversation was very present in my university. There was also a need during that conversation to sanction the violation of academic freedom and freedom of expression. It could not be left without enforcement, an enforcement mechanism. We already had some enforcement mechanisms in the collective agreement, but there's been a Senate statement, and we set up a permanent committee, a standing committee to review the complaints, to analyze and to review periodically. There's a sort of sunshine clause by which we review periodically. The Senate will review our definition, our apprehension of the concept of academic freedom. And one of the most important lessons we had was the process to get to a definition within my campus, with my community, to get there. First, there was the setting up of a committee on academic freedom. After that crisis we'd had, it was a tough exercise, but a meaningful exercise. It came with recommendations, and then these recommendations were submitted to the Senate for analysis and implementation. So during all this process, the conversation was very real on campus. All communities and all groups have been consulted, including the unions. And I must say that I think the maneuver was rather successful because at every step there were some very meaningful and candid and sometimes difficult conversations around these issues. Today, and I'm putting on the chat, if those of you who want to have there are 3 reports basically, so you can go and see for yourself. I mean, it was a very extensive conversation, and the complaint mechanism is very satisfactory. What is very interesting is that since the exercise has been over, that we have the statement, that we have the policies and things, we have not had a single, in 2 years, not a single complaint concerning academic freedom. While before that, my campus was on fire, literally. So I'm not saying that we've solved the issue, but I'm saying that the process leading to a self-definition and a concept which is satisfactory for the community has been extremely, extremely meaningful. And it reflects a consensus. Not everybody is happy, but it certainly reflects a consensus. And I think that us, the community, and us universities, as Liviu, you rightly suggested, we will need to go through that exercise again. It doesn't mean that academic freedom is protected, but it certainly means that we are getting somewhere. What is striking for me, and it's my last reflection as university president, is that I've seen many instances where academic freedom has been or is threatened, but it was never raised by anyone in the community. Let me give you an example. The security concerns our governments have with China, with relationship with Chinese universities. And I think the UK and Australia and the US and Canada, we live more or less the same thing. I mean, clearly, the chilling effect of these governmental measures attacks grossly, in a gross manner, academic freedom for our researchers and for the development of science. No one on my campus has ever raised that as an issue of academic freedom, and I could give more examples. So we have to, how can I say, there are some, and of course, academic freedom, and in the context of the Israel-Hamas war, everybody is on with academic freedom and freedom of expression. That's the obvious one, but the non-obvious issues are rarely raised in those terms, and that is of concern certainly for me. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for this testimony. And I'm glad to see already that we have two complementary contributions. So we shall, having gone east and west, we'll move south with Klaus Beiter. Klaus, if you want to give us all your experience and reflection.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I read the principles with great interest. The first point is there a need to reimagine academic freedom. Surely there is. The question, of course, is what exactly we mean by reimagining. Does it mean inventing something totally new, or does it mean giving content to much of what we already have? I think we have a lot of useful principles already that need to be given life for our time. Liviu referred to the UNESCO 1997 recommendation on the status of higher education teaching personnel and said that it doesn't work. I agree in the sense that it doesn't really work because states do not apply it. But in my view, many of the principles stated there remain valid, especially principles such as self-governance and collegiality. These are perhaps the two principles that are the most eroded in present-day universities. And for me, it is important to point out that there is an important difference between institutional autonomy and self-governance. So institutional autonomy is the freedom of the university, its protection against outside attacks from whatever source, state, economy, or the church. Self-governance is something different. It is the question who governs the university. And that essentially, as research that I've done with Professor Karen and other colleagues has shown, that self-governance really does not apply in most universities anymore, essentially because university autonomy has been used to abolish it. There was a case brought before UNESCO by British unions, and one of the complaints was that there is no self-governance in universities. And the state argued, well, it's because universities have autonomy and they are entitled to abolish it, kind of. So that is a problem for me. So in what sense do principles that we have at the moment do not cater adequately for academic freedom? So obviously we often think of violations in the sense of ideological attacks which happen in the global south. But if I'm asked, I think one of the most serious attacks on academic freedom actually is happening in the global north, and that is the commercialization of higher education. What happens in the case of commercialization? It means granting universities very much institutional autonomy, but it is a technical autonomy. It is the autonomy to act as a market actor, but not really to decide what your strategic mission is, what you are there for, because that has been predetermined by the government. You are there as a university to serve growth of the economy. Then, as I said, self-governance and collegiality are abolished. Now, it's important to understand that efficiency is not really a criterion according to which a university should be governed. So the executive university may well be efficiently managed, but self-governance is ultimately better. It gives the space of governance essentially to active academics because they know science best. Science is there to search for the truth. So active scientists will take decisions which are in the interest of maintaining disinterested science. So I think one of the most serious things happening in science is the introduction of the impact agenda. We see it at the REF. It is detrimental to fundamental research, which is really the basis for groundbreaking innovation. So in that sense, this is an aspect that is to be addressed by a reimagining of academic freedom. Then the question of participation of universities. Yes, of course, I fully agree with that. But again, there's a caveat. We see a bifurcation in universities. Universities often means the executive leadership of the university, rather than those that do the actual work, the academics, the teachers, and the researchers. So listening to those that run the university is something different to listening to those that do the actual science. We need to listen to both, essentially not forget about the actual academics. The next point about academic freedom being a human right, a fundamental right, a governance principle, or a value. I'm a human rights scholar. So from my perspective, there is not really a problem of seeing all of these being very interrelated. I think a problem sometimes comes in certain common law jurisdictions, like, for example, actually the UK. A right really means essentially that, a right, something that you can claim. But in strong constitutional jurisdictions, for example, South Africa, where I come from, or Germany, a human right actually is also a guiding value for the development of the legal system in a certain way. So if it comes to very specific problems, like the principles referred to the choice of research methods, we may perhaps think that we are not solving them in terms of human rights criteria, but ultimately, according to EU and human rights law, there is a right to science in Article 51B of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This is the right of citizens to benefit from science. And in my view, academic freedom is essentially there to make that possible. So it is really rather a duty, perhaps, than a right. It is, creates the obligation for the state to make everything possible that the academics can actually search for that truth. And in that sense, solving very practical problems ultimately is about making sure that that truth can be pursued. Going on to some of the other points mentioned, that we should not reduce academic freedom to certain very specific concepts, such as freedom of speech. Fully agree with that. Also not saying academic freedom is the same as institutional autonomy. A university may have quite a high level of institutional autonomy, but no individual academic freedom for the individual teachers and researchers. So the one does not automatically entail the other. Not over-legalize the concept, I also agree with that. At the same time saying, the state based on law, we need to have certain principles laid down in the law, but the concretization may happen much further down. And especially if it comes to science, because we must remember, in science, it is the autonomous laws of science that govern. So it is actually quite futile to try to regulate science, because science is like the weather. You cannot regulate it. You cannot regulate where breakthrough is going to happen. From that perspective, much of the regulation, again, should be done by those at grassroots level. So by the academic or scientific fraternity making rules. And even those rules need not always be like rules written down. Also conventions or practices that do exist form part of academic freedom. Okay, just 2 more minutes, then my time is over. A multiplicity of efforts, yes, I do see that. As far as Europe is concerned, I think the proper locus for action is the Council of Europe. That is a human rights organization. I don't think the European Union should try to do all the things they are presently doing, because the European Union is not a human rights organization, and in many ways, actually, many of the things they do contradict now this sudden idea to protect academic freedom, because the European Union is very much based on neoliberal ideas of trade in higher education services or research. So that is a thing that should be done by the Council of Europe. And I think there is space for regional differences. Okay, that's the last point I'm going to make. I think there is space for regional difference. So there can be an African document, there can be an American document, there can be a European document. And ultimately, I think there is also room for an international document on academic freedom. It lays down basic principles. The detail is left for the states to regulate. I'm concluding on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for bringing new dimension to the issue that will feed the discussion and your transient contribution, namely the issue of neoliberalism and commercialization of higher education in the northern countries, the importance of science at the service of citizens also, which can help to fight back populism. Well, I shouldn't take the time, so I'll turn directly to Martina Darmanin. Martina, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My focus will be on the freedom to learn as a facet of academic freedom that needs to be reimagined, and the implications of reimagining the freedom to learn on selling these principles, as well as any policies of any institution on academic freedom. These principles do help with that, but I think there could be a point made about the need for a culture to support values and to protect values. You can have any great policy in the world if you don't have a culture on campus to protect fundamental values. That policy is not going to be realized. And quite frankly, the state of our world at the moment shows anything but a culture for the protection of values. So I'll tackle this from the student's point of view. And how would I sell these principles if I had to speak to a student on campus? My pessimistic thinking would be that I'm either going to be faced with a lack of understanding on the importance of these principles, or a lack of a capacity of students to bring these values to life. They might be overcome with work and studying at the same time. This is a reality in the student movement and has been for quite some time, quite an alarming rate of reduced participation in student unions. But to go back to my point, what I think these boil down to is that our learning is not instilling a culture for the protection of values. And to instill a culture, you can't start at the university, you need to start at an even younger age. But aside from that, let's focus on the freedom to learn and how the freedom to learn should be a starting point for action on any policy on academic freedom. Because currently we see that a lot of the focus on academic freedom goes to research and publication of findings, and the importance now increasing on the social dimension as well, which is all very well and all very important. But I think more widely, while these matters touch a minority of people, we need, in my opinion, a narrative for the freedom to learn that not only brings these voices on board, but an even wider group of people, to sell the importance of academic freedom to a wider majority of people. How many of us can say that we can say that we have had the freedom to learn in a way that we believe has helped us reach our full potential? Can we all say that in this room? I think to perhaps varying extents, of course, we can all recount a certain inability to decide a learning pathway of our own personal choice, whether it's in regard to what we could learn, whether it's in regard to who we could learn with, where we could learn, or even how, in what order, and which disciplines we would like to learn. In summary, my view is that if we had to instill the freedom to learn in terms of the autonomous choice among learners to decide how they should be learning, where they should be learning, that is the best way that we can instill these principles. It is important to involve students in governance and decision making, and these principles do address that very, very well. But realistically, the people who are involved in decision-making spaces and in governance are only a small proportion of students in comparison to the many out there who we need to not only understand the importance of academic freedom because they've read this policy or have read about the harrowing experience of a scholar under attack. No, all students need to be able to describe their own lived experience of academic freedom. And if we are to have a culture for the protection to sell these principles and to realize these institutional policies with, then we need to begin with the freedom to learn and how that is being realized in classrooms as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. Liviu, would you like to add something? No? Well, in that case, the floor is open for questions and comments. Yes, the lady here first.
There'll be a microphone.
Sorry, I can't call you by your name because I don't know it. So,
I'm Alice Sullivan. I'm a founder member of the London University's Council for Academic Freedom. So I was very happy to hear the point, I think it was from Klaus, about listening to academics and the fact that academic freedom is something that academics are the main people who have a stake in this. And that brings me on to my question, which is really about how these principles were formed and who you spoke to in the development of the principles. So you haven't really said much about some of the problems in recent years that have led to academic freedom becoming such a big issue. And obviously there are a number of different political issues, but one obvious one is the issue around sex and gender. So I wondered whether you had spoken to some of the women who are really at the sharp end of this to get their insights. So I'm thinking of women like Kathleen Stock, who was hounded out of her job at Sussex, women like Selena Todd, who's had to have bodyguards at her lectures, women like Jo Phoenix, who's just been through an employment tribunal. Yeah, so that's my question.
shall I take a couple? I'll take at least two questions. A second question? Yes, the gentleman here on the right. Well, my right.
Yes, I'm Ian Pace. I'm also a founder member of the London University's Council for Academic Freedom. And I wanted to just ask about in point 11 here, and say the discussion must pay careful and explicit attention to issues of decolonising higher education and academic freedom itself. There are some that will say that many initiatives undertaken in the name of decolonisation have themselves acted as a brake on academic freedom. But if we are to decolonise academic freedom, is that therefore to say that academic freedom itself might be a colonising force?
Thank you. Who would like to answer these two very different questions? On gender, on the issue, Niraja, would you like to say something? Oh, Jacques would like to speak.
Yes, I think the point is well taken that all groups, including groups which are very much on the front line, have to be consulted. It is academic freedom essentially belongs to obviously to faculty members first, and there's the issue of institutional academic freedom. But when one wants to reimagine academic freedom methodologically, it would be interesting to start from all the different instances where we think that academic freedom has been violated or is in the line or is being questioned. And from certainly the hundreds of examples, I mean, then could emerge a sort of classification of the type of violations, and it could help to define what academic freedom is in a given institution, for instance.
Niraja, you were going to say something.
No, the point is indeed well taken. I agree with Jacques. I actually thought the question was addressed to Liviu. I thought that the questioner was asking Alice. Is that right? I thought she was asking Liviu whether this aspect, this perspective, had been taken into account in the formulation of the principles for reimagining academic freedom in the document we've been discussing. But I mean, I think the point is extremely important,
right?
And I agree with Jacques.
Well, I
said it would be helpful empirically, as I think Jacques was suggesting, that if we look at violations of academic freedom, what proportion of them actually emanate from this source. It would be good to know.
Yeah. So, both points are important points, and I didn't know about the council, which is strange a little bit. I'm glad that you made it now. Maybe it would have been.
It's quite new.
It's new, because it would have been good to have you, being here, or at least one of these debates. And in a way, both questions allow me to clarify that this endeavor is not about putting forward a new understanding of academic freedom. So we had this discussion with Kshitij, and I said there are so many definitions, new definitions. It's not our role. We don't have the authority to put forward a new definition of academic freedom. What we are trying to do is to say, look what is happening. There are new conceptualizations, there are new codifications of academic freedom that have been put forward recently, most often without the participation of universities, by which I think we should make clear we mean without the participation of academics as academics and of students as students and staff as staff. So, this is something that has marked me. In 2020, many of you would know, ministers of education from all, at that time, 49 European countries, including Russia and Belarus at that time, adopted a statement, a two-page statement with a common, formally, officially common European conceptual reference, more than just a simple definition for academic freedom. I was a member of the group that drafted that document. I was one of two or three academics, but we were not there as academics, right? So we were there as experts commissioned by an interministerial group with very dedicated bureaucrats, mainly, extremely dedicated. They have done a lot for the cause of academic freedom. There were no academics and there were no students. The European Student Union was represented, but as Martina said, it was, the leaders, the president or the vice president of the European Student Union as representatives of that organization. So this is what we are trying to say. There is a need for a university, and I think Klaus put it very well, what university should mean here, to realize that this is happening and to take the lead, as one of the principals said. It was a little sobering what Niraja said. Well, fine, that's very good, it's very logical, but can universities really take the lead? Can they take the lead everywhere in at least coordinating or creating platforms for coordination? So we didn't try to create a principle to address something specific, whether it is commercialization or whether it's the way in which gender issues are dealt with in research, in teaching, in university governance. So that's why there's nothing as concrete as that in here about nothing else. So we do talk about public good, right? Does that address the issue of commercialization? I'm not sure. As a matter of fact. So, we don't talk about what is happening in Florida or what is happening in Europe. And so that's why you don't see this particular aspect there. I mean, if you think that is a gap, I think you are saying it, so that dimension is not reflected in the principles, well, I think we should think about it and have it reflected. But that was, as I tried to say in my introduction, this is more of a message rather than, so there are principles about what is happening, what should be happening, but we are not trying to create legislation or jurisprudence or a court to address specific instances of infringement of academic freedom or even threat to academic freedom. So that's, I hope that explains a little bit once more the approach. And even today there can be gaps, and I think this is one. We did discuss gender issues in some of our meetings, and we have excellent, very knowledgeable colleagues from the UK and from abroad who did bring them up. But that's how we got here.
Any more?
Danielle, could I
Yes.
follow up for a minute?
Yes.
Oh, yes, of course.
Sorry, no, just to say that among the violations of academic freedom that we have seen in recent times has been in many countries across the world a backlash against gender studies per se.
Right.
So it's not just about individuals, but it's also about disciplines. And there has been a backlash against gender studies, which in fact there is an AHRC project currently at the LSE that is actually studying this experiences across the world.
Yeah. Well, in my country of origin, which is a European Union member, the government adopted a decree saying that gender studies cannot exist. It is true that the Constitutional Court struck out that decree. There's Hungary where, gender studies at master level cannot be accredited, which means they cannot exist as an academic discipline. So it is an issue not only in less democratic country or undemocratic country. And I'm sure everybody knows examples other than that.
Would you like to address the issue of decolonizing that has been raised? Would you like to say something about it?
I didn't answer that question. So we had very interesting debates about that, very open and very direct, with some people very committed to the cause of academic freedom saying, forget about decolonizing academic freedom. Academic freedom is the universal value, is a universal principle. Yes, it has its origin in the West and it's the North, but what's the problem? While other colleagues said, we had, and many of you will know Quadro Agiapei, who said it's not at all like that. There are so many issues of decolonizing academic freedom, and he spoke about the experience of African universities, in particular in the post-colonial period until now. So, my feeling was that other than signaling that there is an issue there. We didn't have enough, how should I say, substance to make a very specific recommendation. So as I also mentioned in the introduction, we had an entire double session dedicated basically to this issue. The title of that double session was, is it possible to have a global common reference for academic freedom? Is it desirable to have? And there were different opinions about that, but I think the message that we can kind of confidently convey is that there is an issue about decolonizing academic freedom. There is a need to think about it, to reflect, to write about it, to do research about it. But again, we don't have any precise recommendation of some of the issues that we have discussed. Was the fact that we have provisions about academic freedom in the UN Covenant of Economic and Social Rights. Isn't that a colonial aspect, a vehicle of intellectual, political colonialism? And some people said yes, some other people say no. So, no, I think universities here have a duty to sustain this reflection, to nurture research and to see what is the issue, what is happening there. And of course, one has to listen. There are people who have written about this, and their voice might be heard or not. We had colleagues who came from Brazil, from Africa, from Asia, who know more than us here. But I don't think personally that I can say more about this issue than what is already there. I think Klaus has his hand raised, if I see one.
Yeah.
Yes, just to mention an example that comes to my mind thinking about decoloniality in higher education, because as you know, it is very topical in South Africa. The question of language in education, we might not consider this an academic freedom issue, but in which language you learn has a lot to do whether you are really able to acquire knowledge, because language is essential instrument we use to vernacularize knowledge, to make it our own in different kind of settings. So academic freedom might perhaps actually entail a claim that you have a right to education, a right to higher education in your language. We see in South Africa like government which is very Anglophile, and we see almost no higher education taking place in African languages, for example, and no endeavor on the part of the government to even put effort into that.
No.
Thank you. I think a lady wanted to speak over there.
Okay, my name's Anne Corbett. I'm from LSE. I'm not the person doing research, but I come about at this as a political scientist. And really, the points that I would like to make relate to the ultimate aim of the debate that you are so rightfully inspiring, and that of convincing society. Now, as a political scientist, I'd say that the universities on their own won't get anywhere on this, because the defense of academic freedom has a political institutional dimension. It's really the outcome of a bargain between higher education and the state. We accepted over the years that the state, the governments, have valued universities because what they can give in terms of knowledge and research and the education of students. So it's a bargain that the governments need to be convinced. This question becomes all the more urgent now when we're in a society in which there's so many challenges to universities, in which in Britain one is seeing things which I haven't seen in my professional experience before, of ministers so openly criticizing universities with terms like being woke, with even the Prime Minister saying that there are rip-off degrees. That doesn't sound like governmental language to me. So all the more important to have this discussion. But I think there are 2 points I wonder if ought to be explicitly recognized. And one is the distinction that Polanyi always made about when you're talking about academic freedom, you're talking about the freedom to, but you're also talking about the freedom from. And I think that could be made more explicit. And the other point that I think comes to me from reading the document is whether these principles distinguish sufficiently between university leadership and the academics who educate, teach, research, reach out to society, and so on. And this is, of course, an important distinction because university leadership has several roles, including, of course, facing outwards to government as well as inward to the institution. And it seems to me that academics need to be explicitly recognized in the devising of principles of academic freedom. Unlike doctors, they don't have a Hippocratic oath which gives them the recognition and protects them in the way that a public can understand. but yet they're the ones who demonstrate why and how adhering to the values of academic freedom matter to the quality of a university institution. And in doing so, they're actually demonstrating an epistemology. That surely is something which should be written in as part of reaching out to a wider public.
Thank you.
Can I say a few words about it?
Yes, of
So
course.
I think this is very important. I have maybe two short reactions. You are right. It's also freedom from, but it's not only freedom from the state or from public authorities, the business or the church. It's also, Klaus mentioned university autonomy has developed so seriously in Europe between after the fall of the Berlin Wall until after the Great Recession that it became the freedom of rectors, the freedom of deans. And I, as head of school, I have the authority to sign or not to sign off for a particular research project because I might like or not like the particular paradigm that is used or methodology there. So in that case, it's freedom from the authority within the university, and we can find other examples. So that's why I have written about this. I think there is a crisis of academic freedom at present, which is in part an intellectual crisis. How do we think about academic freedom? And it has, exactly as you are saying, an epistemological dimension. Now, how far can universities go? Well, it obviously depends. And you are right, there is often a negotiation when there is a negotiation. When you are a university person, rector even, and you negotiate, and the name of the person at the other end of the table is, I don't know, Goebbels, Erdogan, or Orban, there's nothing to negotiate. So which speaks even more for the responsibility of universities in systems where there is democracy, there is a room for negotiation. But I think, what I have learned in the last several years, there is a lot of agency as an agency. So I was provost of Central European University when Central European University was forced out of Hungary and had to relocate to Austria. And I was invited to the Council of Europe to give a talk, because I was from Central European University, about the future, academic freedom and the future of democracy in Europe. And I said, one big problem is that there's no common reference for academic freedom in Europe. We do have common reference for university autonomy, but not for academic freedom. And to my surprise, that was taken over by people from the council, and 2 years later, this reference was adopted. Klaus was also right. University autonomy has been conceptualized in Europe under the force of the neoliberal discourse as a precondition for the for efficiency in university. States, European Commission thought, let's give universities more freedom to allocate resources, to hire and fire, because in this way they will become more efficient. And the strategic autonomy was disregarded, so the direction of travel. But recently there is an effort to define the so-called fundamental values of higher education in Europe, and again, I was invited as an expert in one of these groups, and strategic autonomy will be there. So when the ministers meet again in April next year, there is a chance that they will adopt a definition for university autonomy, which includes the right to decide on the strategic direction of the autonomy. I have never imagined that would be possible, but it is possible. And I think there are ways for universities, in particular in democratic or reasonably democratic countries, to go very far. Again, if you are a university in Myanmar these days, the only matter is survival, is not autonomy or not autonomy, or even in other countries nearby. But I do believe both in the capacity of universities to influence this reimagining of academic freedom, and also in their responsibility in doing so. In particular, when we can influence this, we cannot just wash our hands and say, It was decided by the government, by the parliament, by the Council of Europe, by UN, by I don't know who else. There's a question online.
Yes. You can ask her to unmute. I'm waiting to see if any of our contributors want to respond. No?
Maria, if you want to unmute.
Good. Martina would like to speak. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm just saying how to lower my hand again. Okay, there we go. I just wanted to make a point on what Klaus was mentioning on the decolonization of education. Whether or not public authorities or institutions want to allow you to learn in your own language, at the moment, and sooner or later, more and more, artificial intelligence and the use of technology is going to help enable the decolonization of education. At the moment, anyone can go online, create a course, and have that accessed by millions of learners online. Because of this, I think, therefore, I want to come back to the point about policies that the institutions are making, because the sixth principle, if I'm not mistaken, had made a point about the importance of having the academic community deciding on these policies. I think, and that this should be the wording is quote unquote that this is a possible avenue for engaging in reimagining academic freedom. I think, first of all, it's not just the academic community that needs to be involved in any policy making on academic freedom, nor any other policy, to be fair. The wording can be better made. First of all, that policies should enable reimagining of academic freedom through structured forms of open public debate and dialogue, among other methods for the academic community to reform them when necessary. So it's important that any policy and institution puts forward on academic freedom has a transformation button, a button that enables people to reopen it, reevaluate it, and reform it when necessary. So it should not just be a possibility of an avenue for engaging in reimagining academic freedom. Policies should enable reimagining of academic freedom. Then, open public debate and dialogue. The other principles mention the importance of, the fourth principle was about the relation of other fundamental values to each other. This needs to show as well in the institutional policy. Is this policy being debated openly? Can the public participate in this debate? And how does this relate to public responsibility? This is why I wanted to suggest the improvement to the sixth principle, and to also mention, yes, that the decolonization of education is already happening. It's really needing us to focus on more learners, not only the students that are involved in the governance and decision making, but also enabling all learners to actually live what academic freedom means to them. That is very important, and that was what I stressed also in my first point about freedom to learn.
Thank you. There's go ahead with the question online, Cleo.
So it's for her to say it. She's just raised her hand. Yes.
Go ahead, Maria.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? So my question relates to the principle number 4, how to keep freedom of speech and academic freedom apart. Because it seems to me that there is currently, and since a while, a lot of politicization going on in the academic field. And some in the public have raised the worry or the perception that professors are politicians with a professor's kind of title. So if politicization in the academic space continues, I think it will be very difficult to uphold that distinction. But I agree with the authors of that document that it's important to keep the two distinct. And Jacques mentioned that universities don't have a chance. We will be, I think it was Jacques, we will be actors in geopolitical fights. We will be actors in other political issues as universities are now. But how to keep the two apart to uphold freedom of speech and academic freedom? I have my own opinion on that, and I think a lot of that side that we need to talk about the duties, not just the rights, is involved as well, which relates to the, I think it was Principle 5, that we have to triangle academic freedom with other concepts like academic integrity, etc. And there's certainly more, but I'd really be curious to hear what you think.
An answer?
I don't know if Jacques wants to comment on that,
Jacques?
since his name was called. No, I can give a little bit of a kind of a sociological short potential insight. We see what happens in many countries in Western Europe. There is legislation or other type of regulations adopted which actually restricts academic freedom, in particular international cooperation, in the name of national security. We have seen that in the UK, done by law. We have seen that in Sweden, done by decrees. We have seen that in Norway. You want to cooperate with a particular country, you need to ask approval from the Secret Service, basically. And I don't caricaturize really. But we have also seen the Academic Freedom and Internationalization Working Group here in the UK, which generated, this is an inter-university group, I mean not universities as the leaders of the universities, but academics from several universities, and they have generated their own code of conduct. So how should university face these challenges that come from geopolitical alignments? And I think this is for me a very good example of involvement, engagement of the university itself or universities themselves in reimagining academic freedom and address. So don't accept as such what is coming from the government, from the public authority. Of course, we need to live in a state governed by law, in a rule of law state, and we have to respect all of it. But it is possible to generate our own code of conduct in this case. So even there, I would think that there is agency. In Sweden, there is a lot of discussion currently, and universities are trying to find a way to counteract these attitudes or decisions or regulations that come from the authority, including by, well, what is the right word there, mobilizing public support, general public support. The Association of Swedish Universities is considering, not information campaigns, but acts that would, or activities, gesture that would explain to the general public why the current situation is not good. It's not good for the public good. So there are ways of engaging with it.
In some countries, namely in France in particular, academics have reacted very strongly to some attempts by the government to control them further. They have called even onto the Council of State in order to fight off these attempts. And they have won some battles. So just to confirm what Liviu said, it's possible.
Well, on the other side, if you are, the Slavonic University from Uzbekistan, funded and controlled from Moscow, it is not the same, right? When it comes to not being a subservient geopolitical actor.
So maybe I'm afraid, Liviu, I think I wasn't precise enough, a kind of politicization that is not happening from outside, but from inside of the researchers and maybe students. I always try to have the complete academic community in mind, because my feeling is that sometimes the discussions about academic freedom have a quite, how can I say, naive view about researchers' agendas. So some politicization comes from individual people who might subscribe to the values of a government that simultaneously tries to attack the freedom of the academic space. So it's not sufficient, therefore, to point at self-governance, because if the majority of the personnel in the universities is then politicized, then we lose academic freedom as well. And history has provided us with lots of these cases. I'm here in Austria, and the kind of willingness of most academics to join the Nazi regime is still kind of a big a warning signal that this can easily also come from a preparedness from within. So I think that naivety needs to be tackled as well. So maybe I should have been more precise in pointing at a situation where there's no government pressure, but there is a willful politicization and an unhealthy one from within. Sorry.
True. And Cleo is telling us that
we have to, I thought it was until 9 o'clock. It's 8:30. Well, we'll have to wind up, unfortunately, though there is much more to say about the last issue that you have raised. So thank you very much for the questions, comments, and everybody's contribution. You invited to a small cocktail just down the side here, so we're staying in the same room. And unfortunately, our precious contributors on the panel are not able to join us, but I hope on another occasion it will be possible.
Well, thank you, Danielle. And I wanted to thank my colleagues from the School of Education, Communication and Society, Cleo in particular, who have kept us running for this entire year. And thank you all. Thank you.